Good morning, everybody. Glad to be here. It's nice to see such a good crowd ready and raring to go, right? Is anybody in the business right now, growing things, greenhouse business right now? A few of you are, I know. Okay. As we start this morning, I'm kind of going to give you an idea, go over some production systems, kind of some generalities in a way, not go too specific, but kind of talk about some of the systems that are out there, kind of set things up for the day. Let's see, let me make sure I've got everything working here. There we go. All right. So one of the first things I'd like to do is kind of define hydroponics. Many of you know what this means, but really hydroponics is, we can think of as growing plants in a water or a nutrient solution, or mostly what people think of as growing plants without soil. So that's the kind of definition you've all think about when you think of hydroponics. Many of you have probably maybe been to Disney World down in Orlando and gone through the Epcot, the land ride, where you ride through the greenhouses, and you see some of that. That's kind of one of the best ways people hear about hydroponics, actually. Well, we'll go through and we'll think about why grow hydroponically. And some of you are out there growing right now. And what are the reasons? I know it's a business enterprise, but maybe do you see it as something a little different than field production or conventional production? There's definitely some advantages, generally higher yields, maybe the ability to get a more dense in your production area. A lot of times a cleaner crop, smaller space, but there are some disadvantages. It is sometimes a little more technical than conventional production of horticulture crops and vegetables. And it can be, what's that terrible word there, capital intensive, can be costly, right? Some of you have experienced that. So you want to make sure when you're thinking about your business model that it makes sense for you economically too. And so when we think about it, traditional production of tomatoes and lettuce versus things like hydroponic type production systems, whether indoors or in greenhouses. And you all probably have this presentation to print some slides. Okay. So how are we seeing it used today? Well, we're seeing both large and small scale operations. Some of you here, and we see in Virginia some that are going to be maybe 10,000 square feet or around there. And then we see a lot of maybe one or two 30 by 96 greenhouses that they're doing some type of, maybe they're doing NFT or something. So we see different sizes in Virginia. Certainly with greenhouse floriculture, with even growing dragonwing begonias and petunias and things like that, you're really, by kind of our definition, growing hydroponically. You're growing in a soilless media and you're fertigating that way. So you can kind of almost think of that as hydroponics. We see a lot of hobby growers, people that have small systems, and in Virginia and other states you see a lot of people that are at public school system, middle schools and high schools, where students are learning about hydroponic techniques and aquaponics and things like that. Oh yeah, the last one too. And what did I put there? Previous illegal plants. So we'll see what happens in the next 5 years in Virginia. But used to, that was the one that people would hide away and grow. You may have heard stories about people in Southwest Virginia growing in caves and with grow lights and growing that illegal illegal plant. So many of you have seen hydroponic produce or produce that's come from greenhouses, and you find it even at places like I think this one is Target. Target has some groceries now in some of their stores, right? So you look at this was their section where they have vegetables, things. They got potatoes, onions. They've got tomatoes here. They've got all these tomatoes up here. That's kind of they're not really big as far as tomatoes. That's all they have, but every one of those is greenhouse produced. And then if you look at other stores like Wegmans and Kroger and things like that, you'll see peppers and mini cukes, tomatoes, and a different type tomatoes there, lettuce. That's all grown in greenhouses hydroponically. And then you're also seeing it more and more at farmers markets to some degree. Certainly see it at farmers markets with you all. So some of the things that'll be talked about there are some of the factors that influence growth, and of course you need to think about nutrients, water, air, all these things, light, whether you're in a greenhouse or in some type of other facility, a warehouse type situation. But that'll be covered today to some degree. And thinking about some of your needs, do you need a greenhouse? How much is it going to cost you to put that up? What kind of meters and testing will I have to do? What type of systems will I have to build? How much is that going to cost me? Do I need a germination area? Am I going to grow something that needs to be refrigerated or to be, what's the post-harvest life, I guess? What does it need to be refrigerated? Does it need cool storage as well as transportation? So some of those things will be covered today. So when we look at hydroponic systems, really there's a few different ones. There's some closed systems, and that's what kind of you most of the time think about when you think of hydroponic systems. The NFT system, maybe a float bed system, even media beds with ebb and flood. Also there's drain to waste, and these are all closed loop or recirculated systems where the nutrient solution is recirculated through by the plants. Then there's open systems. Most of the time, small operations in Virginia will grow tomatoes in open systems or drain to waste systems. Substrate can be used in some cases. Here, river rock, maybe some type of soilless media. This little kind of quasi NFT system with strawberry pots here. They're growing here in a soilless media. But other things, hobbyists use clay pebbles, and there's other amendments and things you can grow in. Certainly, there's vertical systems. This is kind of an interesting looking maybe system that you would do in a building with a light and rotation around there. Aquaponics, which I think there's a handout also. I brought that just so you could have it. We might talk about aquaponics when we get to today when we get to the farm. But there's a handout there for you. Let's start with the first one. NFT stands for nutrient film techniques. There's just a film of nutrient that passes by the roots of the plant. This is kind of a typical setup here, as you see, tables of some sort, and then you've got channels, maybe gutters, some type of channels that the plant, once it's been established, can go into that system, and the nutrient solution can flow past it. That's pretty much the basics of that. Again, channels. Here's a little small system in a high school that they're setting up. Some type of reservoir where the nutrient solution goes. Some type of input where the water is input at the channels at one end, and then it's collected and goes back. So it's a closed loop system, a recirculation type system. And here's another example. This one, though, is using a PVC pipe, and you can see the different frames, but the same process where you've got input on one end, drain at the other end, and the nutrient solution flows through by the plants.
Chris, on the material you showed that like a PVC pipe, is that can you get it through supply, or do you have to make it yourself?
You can. The PVC pipe, mostly you're going to make it yourself, and there are a few different ways that you can have these channels. You can buy them pre-made from companies, lots of different ones. All maybe a little different, but then some people are opting to make them themselves. This was a Department of Corrections facility, and they decided they've got a fair amount of labor, So they decided to kind of make it themselves, and it worked out. They even they had them spaced a little closer together, and then as they grew, they moved them over to a different table to harvest to finish the crop. But yeah, as you look at, even these channels can be purchased. They're made by other companies. You can't make those. But this is just an example of using the square footage a little bit to your advantage, kind of almost a vertical garden situation. Again, collection at one end, a tank in the ground, pumped back to the other end, and it flows down. Here we go again. You can see how simple collection. These are trays that were purchased. And you can also see they're starting in the same greenhouse. Well, they have tomatoes in the same greenhouse, but they have this little section where they do NFT lettuce. They start their lettuce here and then put it in the system. Here you can see the input is just a PVC, a tube going into in this case, into the back cap of the channel. And then, of course, somebody got a little happy with the cleaner there all over the place. This is an example of one that was in the northern neck of Virginia that had rolling carts where you could plug in to this. There's kind of a manifold on every 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Plug them in, and the nutrient solution flows through it. It's collected. It's hooked into a collecting system. And then when it's time to harvest, it was just wheeled out to an area for harvest. And you can see this is even a different looking channel made by a different company. But this is, there's lots of these hobby type systems that are for sale. And you'll notice this is a little larger hole in here, and that's for net pots. The other one might be a float bed system that you could use. And you might, maybe you're familiar with these if you live in Southside Virginia and you've seen tobacco transplant production. A lot of those seedlings are raised in float beds. They're a little different trays than you see here, but it's the same kind of idea. Float bed system that's anywhere from 6 to 12 inches deep. You might have to move the water around with an internal sump pump within the pool. And you can add fertilizer directly to the bed, or you could have another way that it flows through and is into another tank that you use the fertilizer added to that, and then it flows back into the bed. The nice thing about floats is it gives you the ability to kind of convey, kind of move the production in one area. So if this room was a big float bed and we were putting float trays in this side that had just been planted, you would push everything to that side and harvest out of that side, put new ones down here. So from a process standpoint, it's nice. Here's some examples. This is just basil that was grown, multi-seeded basil. You can kind of see that they've made float trays, and they started here. They were actually using tilapia also in this system to fertilize the basil. And you can see what a raft might look like with a couple of different types of lettuce on it in each raft. And the roots are going to look something like that when it's ready to harvest. This is bib lettuce that's ready to harvest. That's harvestable size. So you can see the difference here. These are some white trays, and I've got an example I'll show you at the farm later this afternoon of these trays that you can buy that are kind of from a company already pre-made versus something that you could make yourself. This is just insulation board that you'd find at one of the big box home improvement warehouses, and you could cut your own holes and space them the way you want to. But you can also buy those things pre-made. Just another example. Here's lettuce in net pots in a system, a flow-through system. So when we're thinking about NFT systems, mostly what we're thinking about is lettuce, greens, herb production, right? And these are crops that are relatively easy to grow. There are cool season crops. They are somewhat perishable, so you have to think about some sort of cooler storage. You have to think about packaging a little bit with all these, but with lettuce in general, you have to think about some type of packaging. Here it's just in a plastic bag like this, and that could go to food service or somewhere that's just going to take it, restaurants that's just going to take it and use it. But to go to the grocery stores, they're usually packed in a clamshell container or called a crisper that has a well in it even for some of the roots to stay on. So you're seeing romaine, head lettuce, leaf lettuce, Lola Rosas, Boston lettuce, a lot of different types, a lot of different out there, a lot of different types of lettuce, let's just say. Bib lettuce, an older variety, Ostinata, Rex, somewhat still used. Usually all these are started, like I've showed you a picture before, they're started in some type of media that's really just a substrate for root growth through it. So maybe rock wool cubes or oasis cubes. You can see the crop time. We probably get 10 to 12 crops turns per that plant space annually. So you can see some different textures here, some different colors. Really nice ones out there. That could also be made into mixes, bag mixes. So again, they're going to be started in something like this, rock wool in this case, where they're started either using raw or pelleted lettuce seeds. need about 70 degrees, and they're going to stay in this stage for a couple weeks before they're going to, the roots are going to start growing through the oasis or rock wool, and you'll see it's time to put them into the NFT trays. And they can also, if you need them to hold them longer, you can break these apart and separate them. So, but it's nice to have some type of even bottom watering situation like this or like this, where you can spread things out. Having lots of space is important to think about for the germination area. And again, if you're not familiar with these at all, rock wool and oasis both come in blocks that fit in a 10-20 flat, and they've got a space. This, I don't know if you can tell, this is pelleted seed here, but you can almost see it starting to germinate and break right there. And both of these substances wick water very well and will stay wet. And this is as the seedling is put in there, it had been in there for a day or two, but you see it's the roots are growing through it. And at the end of the growing, when you're harvesting, that whole channel is almost completely full with roots. So thinking about the lettuce, you're going to be doing some things every week. You're going to be seeding every week. You're going to be putting, you're going to be making transplants every week. You're going to be harvesting every week. You want this to be very consistent. Anything that you're growing here, wherever you're selling it, you want to have consistency. It's real important. If you're wanting to sell to grocery stores or go to a distribution center, they want consistency, almost at least equal to quality. They need consistency. You're monitoring water quality, adjusting. You're always scouting for insects and disease problems. So a lot of duties for you when you're growing lettuce here. Certainly nutrition is going to be a factor, and that'll be talked a little bit about later. But you're using different fertilizers to mix up. This is pretty much what we're talking about here is conventional production, not organic. And you're checking electric conductivity and pH, and maybe even tissue analysis. This is one potential way that you would fertilize lettuce here with 8-15-36 or something like 5-11, some type of complete fertilizer. So there's lots of sources for things like seeds out there, and this goes for a lot of lettuce or leafy greens or tomatoes or peppers or eggplant. These are just a couple. Paramount Seeds in Florida, they have a lot of greenhouse varieties. And Johnny's, if you've ever dealt with them, are a great place. If you're looking for lettuce, they have a lot of different ones out there. A lot of mixes also. In general, with greenhouse production, there's going to be disease problems, potentially pest problems, because you're in an enclosed environment. You can exclude a lot, but you also, once there's an outbreak of a problem, it can spread. It can be there and spread pretty quickly. So just some things to think about. Exclusion fabric to keep things out, to keep insects out. The use of beneficial insects can be important in a greenhouse situation if you want to stay away from a lot of pesticide use, because many of your customers might not necessarily care if you're organic anymore. They might want to know that you're local, but they probably even more want to know that you're pesticide free. So if you think about it, most consumers, and that whole organic thing confuses them a little bit. They don't really think it's just about pesticides and insecticides and herbicides. It's also about fertilization too, but they're more worried that something's being sprayed on the crop. So there is a little bit of a higher production cost with anything you grow in the greenhouse, but when we're thinking about lettuce, certainly the greenhouse itself, the systems, add a little bit to the cost of your costs, and then the cost of production can be a little bit higher. So some opportunities to sell to different things. Local things now are happening, so people want locally grown produce. So maybe a small grocery store can be one. Farmers markets, even the schools now are wanting local things. So that might be able to go. This is a nice way to package right here. If you're going to food service, it's very cheap compared to those crispers, which they can be a chunk of your production cost is going to be your packaging. Well, look at this. This is pretty consistent. You know, this is a crisper with lettuce in it, and most of the time you see it around that price at the grocery store. Of course, they're taking their money out of it too. They don't certainly pay that much for it, or even close to that. Probably about half that. Probably about 30 hours per week on a 30 by 96 house, somewhere around there. Because, like we talked about, you've got high startup costs with putting a greenhouse up. Depending on the type, you could put a Cadillac of a greenhouse up, or you can put more like a Yugo of a greenhouse up. And then the systems can be expensive. You know, when we think about NFT, it's probably going to be a little bit cheaper to use PVC pipe, drill holes yourself, than to buy the other type. But there's also some advantages to the other pre-made channels. Probably around 90 cents break-even cost for a 30 by 96 greenhouse, based on some work that University of Kentucky has done. That might be a little high though. Yeah.
Isn't it per head of lettuce?
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, I shouldn't put that in there. So certainly with NFT, lettuce is a big one. Lots of different types there. But if you look, there's certainly culinary herbs, other types of leafy greens, even mixes or microgreens can do very well. Swiss chard, bok choy, a lot of things like that. Different type things. Microgreens, certainly in flats maybe, or you could use channels like this. This is duckweed, growing it as a supplement for feeding tilapia to make aquaponics a little more sustainable. Let's switch a little bit to tomato production, thinking about tomatoes. And this is probably one of the most widely grown greenhouse vegetable in the U.S. And in North America, really. A lot of big players in the business in the southwestern part of the U.S., but you see them in other places. Canada has quite a bit around Leamington, Ontario. A lot of production of cukes and tomatoes and peppers. And in Mexico, there's a lot of production happening in Mexico now. Is it conventional greenhouse production like we've been talking about here? Maybe not, but it's some type of protected culture growing tomatoes. And this is one that used to be in Virginia, all tomatoes, about 42 acres. And this is high-tech production that you see, the kind of production you see in Europe, and a lot of the big players that I mentioned before, where things are grown in rock wool. This is more of a medium-sized, about 10,000 square foot greenhouse doing tomatoes in the state. So a little more, a little bit different production system. And then even single Quonset huts in ground, in the soil. Production here, very similar in the way that they produce, whether it's 10,000 square feet or smaller. And what you see here are 5-gallon vertical bags that are filled with some type of media, usually a peat-based or bark-based media. The big growers are using something like rock wool, the same kind of rock wool we saw with the lettuce, but it's in slabs and blocks. So pretty high-tech production system. A few others, NFT and soil, but mostly what we see in Virginia for most smaller operations are going to be bags, some type of bag culture. And with tomatoes, it can be maybe a 1 or a 2 crop situation, where you've got a fall crop, and it's a very short crop, and then you start another one in the spring, and go all the way through July until it gets too hot in most of the state. Or a one crop system where you're planting into the greenhouse a little bit later, and you run the crop throughout the growing year. They're very similar in the production, but it can be, you can have, running a crop 10 months, you can end up with a lot of problems. You get a lot of insect and disease problems throughout that long period. But also costs are a little higher when you're starting new seeds and going to a new crop. The seeds for tomatoes are very expensive. They can range from 25 to 30 cents per seed. So that can be an expense. So bag culture, like we talked about before, some type of plastic bag. This one is used. It ends up being round, has leach holes in the bottom, filled with some type of media. Most of the time, like I said, it's some type of soilless media, usually bark or peat based. And here's some examples of that. There's also lay flat bags that would lay on the ground, and you can put 3 plants in them. Dutch buckets, I've got one of those I can show you this afternoon. This particular grower this was a person that had been growing in this house. I think they had geraniums in that house, and they were growing in big 12-inch pots, and they decided to put tomatoes in, and so they just used, it's hard to tell, but these are decorative 12-inch Pantera pots. So they just used those. It's what they had, and it worked out fine. So any containers you have.
Our sources for those bags, they listed under this supplying information.
Who do I have listed there? Like Hydro Gardens and Crop King.
Crop King, Hydroponic.
I think Farm Tech sells those. Yeah, so that you can find those. The bags are not very expensive, and you can find it in most of those hydroponic supply houses. A lot of times, varieties that are being used are indeterminate tomato varieties that are Trust, or as an example, that's kind of the workhorse of the industry. It's been used quite a bit. More and more, there's grafted tomatoes that are being used on vigorous rootstock and disease-resistant rootstock that do very well. And I'm going to hurry along. I think I'm going to talk fast, so y'all listen fast, okay? We're going to move along to stay on schedule. Usually 1 or 2 plants per bag. This is a 1 plant per bag system, but a lot of times people will reduce their cost in this bag by having 2 tomato plants coming out of it. What you're looking at overall in the greenhouse is anywhere from 4 to 5 square feet for every plant. Again, a way to pollinate with tomatoes, whether it's a hive of bumblebees or hand pollination, you have to do something. Tomatoes are wind pollinated primarily, so you will get pollination just from fan movements, or if you have roll up curtains in your greenhouse, movement of air through there, ventilation that way. But hives are certainly a way. If you have a certain number of plants and kind of a threshold there, you'd want to use bumblebee hives. Some of the things that you're having to do every week: clipping the plants, putting clips on them so they can be tied to a string and trellis, lowering the plants in that system, putting things like cluster supports possibly. If you get a heavy fruit load, those will strip off if you don't put plant supports. Pruning the clusters to make sure you have 3 to 4 tomatoes or fruit per cluster. Stripping off lower leaves. You can see that these leaves have been stripped off, leaving at least 4 to 5 feet of photosynthetic area here, but giving yourself some air movement through there to prevent some potential disease problems. Clipping, you're clipping to this string, so you've got some type of wire rope at high up around 8 feet in the greenhouse. So being able to clip, there's a different type with the string coming down. And you can see the clip that clips to the string and also clips to the stem of the tomato plant. There you go, yeah. And that particular operation, we'll skip that. So post-harvest, when you're thinking about post-harvest life of lettuce, root can be on or off. Sometimes you see a little bit of longer post-harvest life with leaf on. In a clamshell, it needs to be cooled, maybe with some type of forced air cooler, maybe pushing air through it, or pulling air through boxes or pallets. Tomatoes, generally, these are going to be harvested pretty red. And here's just a guy that was delivering in a minivan. He just took the seats out, but turned the air conditioner on and kept it a little cool in there to get them delivered. And this is the primary way that tomatoes are going to be packaged. in a single layer, if you're selling them in boxes, in a single layer box instead of a double layer box. If you think about most greenhouse tomatoes still have the calyx attached, and it's a little sharp, so if you start stacking tomatoes on top of each other, you're going to have damage. So this is an example of how you have the calyx down and the sticker on the blossom end there. That plant support structure where the wires are attached, you've got a heavy fruit load on tomatoes, so don't discount how heavy that is. Can you see how these supports that are set in concrete 2 feet in the ground, they're being pulled to the center because of the weight on that wire rope. Tomatoes, drain to waste system here like we talked about. So you're running your fertigating, you're running your irrigation water through some type of fertilizer injector and adding your fertilizer to the water stream that's going into the plant through some type of drip emitter. This might be one example of how you run some of these fertilizers from the transplant to the second cluster, from the second cluster to the fourth, from the fourth cluster to the finish of the crop, and how things change over time a little bit. I'm going to run through this a little quick. Potentially tissue testing for your tomato crop. It's a longer lived crop, so that would be one versus lettuce or leafy greens that you would possibly test for. And this is in there, but we're going to move through that kind of quick. Let's see, some things here we want to talk about. You can kind of see how much you're going to be watering. Kind of gives you an idea of maybe how even to zone your greenhouse out if you need to. Some problems, more problems as far as insects in the tomato greenhouse than with lettuce or leafy greens. You see aphids and whiteflies as being big problems. To some degree, spider mites and thrips. Sometimes fungus gnats on the media if it stays real wet. But you definitely have the ability to use biological control in these systems. Beneficial insects that are out there. A few companies now that are selling beneficial insects, and it's one of those things that there's a cost involved, but it's actually, if you want to keep your pesticide use down, these can be good at keeping your pest populations in check. And there's usually some type of predator or parasitoid for every pest that we have in the greenhouse, or some combination of those. Peppers are another one, potentially in greenhouses. We'll kind of run through this real quick. Night temperatures in the greenhouse is what really costs you money. In Virginia, the biggest expense for your production costs are going to be heating, your energy input for heating. Peppers, you want it to be greater than 65 degrees Fahrenheit at night usually. Tomatoes are usually around 62 or so Fahrenheit. Lettuce and leafy greens are going to be a little cooler than that. Cucumbers can be one that's typically grown in greenhouses. You're seeing more and more of these smaller cucumbers, snack type cucumbers. Have you seen those in the grocery store? Packed in bags or cellophane wrapped in little containers. They can be very, very productive. Potentially strawberries in a greenhouse. You have to get fairly high production, a couple pounds per fruit generally. Or you can pay people to come in and eat right away, and you just have to weigh them when you go in and weigh them when they come out. And that's the way. He's almost 6 feet tall now at 13 years old. He's a big one. And I've got some of these pots. This is a vertigrowth system with strawberries just getting planted here. But that's another potential for strawberry systems. I'll mention this a little more at if you're interested at the farm. We'll talk a little bit more about aquaponics, and you do have a copy of the presentation. And this is combining fish production with some hydroponic plant production system, whether it's a media bed, an NFT, a drain to waste system, or a float bed. Tilapia is usually the fish of choice when you're using those as a nutrient source. Seeing a lot of hobbyists want to do this. A lot of people want to do it at their home. So that kind of quickly wraps this up. Certainly Crop King, Hydro Gardens, there's others out there that have supplies for greenhouse production. All right. Well, that was quick. Thank you for listening fast. And
book sources.
what's that?
Run the book sources.
The book sources, yeah, there's some good ones out there. Lynette Morgan has got a few others now, certainly with Strawberries too. This is kind of for a long time was a really big one with hydroponic production was Howard Resch's book. And there are some others out there. If you Google, even on Amazon, if you type in hydroponics, you're going to find a lot of books on that. Yeah, so that was quick. Yes.
Just a quick question. On the fertilization, what was the specific source to get the fertilization per plant?
For the
For fertilization for all of these inputs, I see you have for tomatoes and for peppers. What's the source of information for that?
oh, to find out where that might be.
Exactly.
There's probably going to
Maybe
be.
it's listed, but I wasn't sure.
No, there's probably going to be. Those are what I listed are the ones that I tend to use in our production. That tomato one is kind of called a modified Steiner solution. This one has this publication at Kentucky, I believe, has something. And Neil probably has some things. Lettuce. Yeah. So he's gonna cover that in a lot more detail than I just glazed over it. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Do you ever experience powdery mildew in your lettuce?
Not so much in lettuce. We see a fair amount of powdery mildew in tomatoes. Lettuce, no, I don't tend to see it. Lettuce, I see more problems with Pythium, root problems. Are you seeing it in lettuce?
Ooh, that.
Really?
I have to treat it every week, all year.
Do you treat it with maybe hydrogen oxidate or
No, I have an
sulfur?
organic fungicide, bacteria-based spray.
Right. Okay. Powdery mildew is kind of a funny thing. It needs wet nights but dry days to really spread and thrive. So it can be an issue. We see it mostly in tomatoes, though, and it can be a real problem with tomatoes. Yeah. Henry.
I just wondered if that could also be an issue, Joyce kind of talked about the environment, like
Yeah. As much as you don't want to ventilate on a cold night, if you've got dry air, if you've got wet air inside the greenhouse, you might want to be able to ventilate. It's costly because you're pulling cold air in and your heaters are just running.
Mm-hmm.
But in poinsettia production, where it's a real problem, they found that it was cost effective. It was cheaper than the fungicides they were having to add.
Yeah.
There you go.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you all very much. I appreciate your attention.